This edition of Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose is sponsored by Carasoft. On this edition of Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose, the data that's driving the federal government's workforce rebound, the people process that software can't solve, and saving money might be the wrong reason for tech modernization at DHS. Welcome to Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose. The Office of Personnel Management's new data strategy for fiscal years 2023 through 26 includes 4 pillars. The Director of OPM, Kiran Ahuja, writes that strategy will, quote, lay a strong foundation of people, data, technology, and governance for long-term success. Ted Kaouk is Chief Data Officer at OPM, Chair of the Federal Chief Data Officers Council. Ted, welcome. It's great to see you again. Thanks for coming on the program. How did you determine that the 4 pillars in this strategy were the 4 things you wanted to focus on at OPM?
Well, Francis, we started with looking at the broader landscape and what's happening with digital transformation, the proliferation of artificial intelligence, and the demands that agencies have for increased focus on organizational health and performance. And all of that is really driven by data skills and access to data and data analytics. And so we took sort of a look at that landscape and really centered on 2 key areas of focus. One is our ability in OPM to ensure that the federal government has the needed data skills to deliver on all of the priorities I was just talking about and to deliver on the federal data strategy, from leadership to early career talent. And then also taking account of the fact that OPM has data on the largest workforce in the country, data on talent acquisition, demographics, attrition, organizational health, employee engagement, and our opportunity to provide value to agencies by developing data products that enable them to make decisions through a seamless customer experience with access to that data. You
snuck a couple of the pillars in on me in that answer, but the first one that is in this strategy is a strong data-driven culture. Yeah. Culture always seems to be the hardest thing for federal agencies to reorganize or reshape. How are you going to go about doing that regarding data at OPM, Ted?
Yeah. So we're thinking about the data skills needs of the federal government overall. So it really starts at the top with leadership. Our first objective in the data strategy for that reason is focused on updating the executive core competencies for the senior executive service to include data fluency. It's really important that through the leadership pipeline in our development that there's a real focus on asking the right questions. With the development of artificial intelligence, it'll be even more important for leaders to have those capabilities. We're also really focused on ensuring that we have the right competencies in place. So looking at our occupational series to see if they need to be updated and created for artificial intelligence, data analytics, data management. And there's also a large focus on recruitment into government. We've had, I think, some success with government-wide hiring actions. About a year and a half ago, we had a government-wide hiring action that brought 50 data scientists into government. We're going to be doing more of those this year. And there are some early success stories about the competitive nature of the mission. We'll take somebody like Charlotte McClintock, who came in and hit the ground running at the State Department, who got an opportunity to go to Egypt and provide on-the-ground data support to the climate negotiations team. Says it's the coolest data work that she's ever been able to do in government. Similarly, the U.S. Digital Corps Fellows have a great opportunity for agencies to bring in talent. We hired a couple of Digital Corps Fellows, Sahithi Adari and Justin Lewis, who have been doing fantastic work on the early career talent side, developing some of our government-wide dashboards. So we're really focused on how to tell that story about bringing in talent and how to upskill the teams that we have. And then I'll just add one more item there, is that we're also focused on how we leverage the fact that we may have, with the largest workforce in the country, the largest HR analyst community in the country. So in the HR data space, standing up things like an HR analytics community of practice, where we have a couple of hundred practitioners across government who are meeting every month to share the common questions they're trying to answer, best practices, and then that also provides us at OPM an opportunity to potentially scale some of the solutions that individual agencies are developing. So those are a few of the things in the data skills area that we're focused on.
We've mentioned AI a couple of times already, Ted, and industry and agency leaders always tell me data fuels artificial intelligence. What's the intersection between AI and what you're doing in the data shop at OPM and the data strategy that you're talking about here?
Sure. So, I mean, first I think we're going to be developing data products that enable a seamless customer experience. We want to take advantage of all the data we have and provide those tools to agencies. And we'll maybe talk about artificial intelligence, but we're starting with, let's provide better access to that data to agencies. And this, again, is things like the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, attrition, data on hiring, but we're also looking at the broader applications where artificial intelligence may be applied to reduce the level of effort in the hiring process, and the impact of some of the new technologies like generative artificial intelligence and what that would mean for the workforce in terms of their ability to do knowledge work in government. So that's something we're certainly going to be taking a look at. Are
those the kinds of things that you're referring to in pillar number 2, high quality human capital data products?
Well, I mentioned that we do collect data from across the human capital life cycle at OPM.
Yep.
So we've been working with the chief human capital officers to understand what are the common questions that they have that we can deliver through those products. We've been working with our programs to create a seamless customer experience. With our data strategy, we released some initial public data products on the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey and things like the cyber workforce, but we're also developing role-based authenticated dashboards and a roadmap this year to deliver them on such topics as demographics, attrition, organizational health, and we want to continue to innovate. And as we move up that maturity scale from sort of descriptive analytics, providing through those exploratory dashboards, we're also going to be looking at how we better understand the reasons why things are happening. In the government, for example, we may find some significant distinctions on attrition as compared with the private sector, given that there are so many opportunities for people in the federal government to move between agencies, and what does it mean when they do so, and how do we know that?
Pillar number 3 is technology and tool modernization, and this is probably a question as much for the CIO at OPM, Guy Cavallo, who's talked about this on a number of occasions, as it is for you. But what does that pillar mean from your perspective as the CDO?
Well, it just, I think, reemphasizes our central role in collecting human capital data across government. We want to ensure that if you're a federal employee, you have access to the data that you need in one place, whether that's on data on benefits, on your personnel actions or decisions about your career. We want to make sure that the chief human capital officers come into a seamless environment to access that data. So we need to modernize our underlying platforms to enable that integration of the data, and we're working closely with Guy and his team to make that happen at OPM, and we're excited about that vision. We want to have a common set of tools so we can collaborate across OPM, but also so we can provide the ability for agencies to access and develop their own reports as well.
The 4th pillar is effective data governance, and I wonder, is that pretty much policy and process, or is there more to it than that?
Well, it covers a number of different components, but as I mentioned, as we're developing those products, we want to make sure that we have a common look and feel for them. So part of that governance is working with all of our programs to ensure that we're coordinating what we're releasing. We're also working to integrate a lot of our data through some of the data modeling work we're doing. This would enable a 360-degree view into employees across government, enable us to integrate data in a way that we can't do that today.
You talked about how this is not just, the goal is not just to serve data and make it available better at OPM, but to make it available across the federal government. Do you think you have an advantage in being able to do that, given that you have that cross-cutting view as the chair of the CDO Council? How does that help you make those connections?
That's a good segue into some of the work on the Federal CDO Council. And in fact, shared decision support across government is one of the key problem areas that the CDO Council has focused on for a number of years, going back to the pandemic. How do we provide agencies with data on workforce safety in a time of crisis? And some of the work that we've done and recommendations we've provided, which were an important input into the OPM data strategy on how do we create government-wide tools in HR, like some of the diversity dashboards that CDO Council initially created. So what I think we're also seeing is some of the progress that agencies themselves have made at that CFO Act agency level. You think about an agency like State, USDA, or Treasury. A few years ago, it would have taken weeks to get access to some of this HR emission data. And so we're taking a hard look at what that means both for the CDO profession, but also for opportunities for organizations to transform in the use of their data. And so we're looking at this concept of enterprise analytics. How do you stand up a program? How do you get buy-in? How do you integrate that data? And what should other agencies look to in terms of the best practices there? And I think also just taking note of what the CDO profession, how it's progressed over the last few years. We have CDOs that have already developed large enterprise teams, assistant chief data officers in the component areas that are coordinating all of their work, and we have CDOs that are still in office of one or maybe even dual-hatted. And so how do those best practices lead into the future for CDOs across government is something we're looking at. So there is a tie-in there.
Ted Kaouk, it's great to talk to you again.
Thanks
very much for coming on the program.